She thought it was just another shift at the diner, until a group of arrogant women decided to make her their target. They mocked her accent, questioned her intelligence, and even tried to get her fired. But what they didn't know was that the quiet waitress they were humiliating had more power than they could ever imagine. And when she finally spoke up, the entire restaurant froze. The day started like any other for Maya Thompson, a 23-year-old waitress at a popular downtown diner called Sunnyside Cafe, a place that had been in business for over 30 years and had built a reputation for its warm atmosphere and hearty breakfasts. Maya had been working there for almost 2 years, and she was well known among the regular customers for her bright smile, quick wit, and the way she made everyone feel at home. She wasn't just good at her job. She genuinely cared about the people she served, remembering their usual orders, their children's names, and even the stories they had shared with her weeks before. But underneath her kindness was a quiet strength shaped by years of learning how to rise above prejudice. That morning, the cafe was busy as always, the sound of clinking cutlery and the smell of fresh coffee filling the air. The warm, golden light from the windows spilled across the tables, where families chatted over pancakes and businessmen typed away on laptops. Maya moved gracefully between tables, balancing plates like a pro. She had just taken an order from a young couple when the door opened, and a group of 3 women stepped in, their designer handbags and flashy jewelry catching the morning light. They walked with an air of superiority, their heels clicking loudly on the tiled floor as they glanced around the cafe. Maya put on her usual friendly smile and approached them with menus in hand. "Good morning. Table for 3, she asked warmly. The women exchanged glances, their lips curling slightly, and one of them, tall, blonde, and wearing oversized sunglasses indoors, let out a short laugh. "Yeah, sure," she said in a dismissive tone, as if Maya's greeting had been unnecessary. Maya led them to a booth by the window, setting the menus down gently. "My name's Maya. I'll be taking care of you today. Can I start you off with some drinks?" The blonde woman didn't answer right away. Instead, she leaned toward her friends and whispered something that made them all giggle. Then she finally looked at Maya and said, "I guess I'll have a cappuccino, but make sure it's not too bitter. You people never seem to get it right." The words hit Maya like a dart, sharp and intentional, but she didn't let her smile falter. She simply nodded and said, "Of course, and for you." The second woman, a redhead with a sharp nose and perfectly manicured nails, smirked and said, "I'll have a chai latte and make sure the cup is clean. I don't want any leftovers from whoever was drinking before me." Her tone dripped with the kind of contempt that needed no further explanation. Maya knew exactly what they meant, but she kept her composure, jotting down their orders and turning to the third woman, who simply said, "Just water, and make it quick, we're in a hurry." As Maya walked back toward the counter to prepare the drinks, she could feel their eyes on her, accompanied by the sound of stifled laughter. She was no stranger to rude customers. Working in the service industry meant developing a thick skin, but there was something particularly ugly about this interaction. Still, she told herself to focus on doing her job. She made the cappuccino, the chai latte, and poured the water, taking extra care to ensure everything was perfect. When she returned to the table, she set down the drinks with her usual politeness. "Here you go. Would you like a few more minutes to look over the menu?" she asked. The blonde looked her up and down and said, "I guess so, but do you actually know what's good here? Or do you just say everything's good to get tips?" Maya took a small breath and replied, "I can recommend our specials. The blueberry pancakes and the garden omelet are customer favorites." The women exchanged smirks again, and the redhead said, "Blueberry pancakes? How quaint. We'll think about it." Maya stepped back, giving them space, but she could still hear snippets of their conversation. They weren't trying to be quiet. In fact, it seemed like they wanted her to hear. "Can you believe she's our waitress? Look at her hair and those shoes. One of them said, "Probably the only job she could get." Another added. Maya clenched her jaw, choosing not to react. She had learned long ago that reacting to ignorance often gave it more power. But she couldn't ignore the knot forming in her stomach. When she returned to take their food order, the blonde said, "We'll have 2 avocado toasts and 1 garden omelet. And make sure the omelet's done properly, no half-raw eggs. I don't want to have to send it back and wait for you to try again." "Of course," Maya replied, jotting it down without missing a beat. As she walked away, she heard the redhead mutter, "I wonder if she even finished school." The words stung, not because they were true, Maya had graduated with honors from college, but because they were meant to belittle her simply because of who she was. She delivered their food 20 minutes later, ensuring everything was plated perfectly. But even then, the women found things to complain about. The avocado was too mushy, the toast too crispy, the omelet too plain. They sent the omelet back, forcing Maya to apologize and have it remade, all while rolling their eyes and sighing dramatically. Other customers began to notice, some shooting Maya sympathetic glances. It was clear to everyone in the room that these women were being deliberately cruel. By the time they finished their meal, Maya had been insulted at least a dozen times, but she never once raised her voice or lost her professionalism. She cleared their plates, brought them the check, and thanked them for coming in. The blonde picked up the bill, glanced at it, and said loudly, "Wow, this service really wasn't worth it. But I guess you people don't know any better." She dropped a few crumpled dollar bills on the table, less than a 10% tip, and the 3 of them got up to leave, still laughing as they walked out the door. Maya stood by the counter, watching them go, a mix of anger and sadness swirling in her chest. She had done everything right, but their cruelty wasn't about her performance. It was about her existence. What they didn't know was that Maya wasn't just a waitress trying to get by. She had dreams, plans, and a strength that came from facing moments like this and rising above them. And she was about to prove that no amount of hate could break her spirit, because the next time those women crossed her path, they wouldn't be laughing. The next morning, Kendra walked into Maple and Thyme with a determined smile. She had thought about quitting the night before. After all, why keep coming back to a place where you might be insulted again? But something in her spirit told her that walking away would mean letting those women win. Her grandmother's words rang in her ears. "Baby, you don't let nobody steal your joy or your dignity. They ain't big enough for that." So she straightened her apron, tied her hair neatly back, and promised herself that today would be different. The regular morning rush was already in full swing, college students with laptops sipping lattes, parents with toddlers nibbling on muffins, and businessmen quickly grabbing breakfast before work. Kendra moved with practiced ease, juggling coffee orders, delivering plates, and checking in with each table. Despite the previous night's events, she greeted everyone with her usual warm smile, determined to treat every customer with the same kindness she had been raised to give. But just as she started to relax, she saw them, the same 3 women from last night, walking through the door. Her stomach tightened. They were laughing about something, each wearing the same smug, self-satisfied expression. Kendra's first instinct was to avoid their table entirely, but unfortunately, her section was the only one with an open booth large enough for them. She took a deep breath and walked over. "Good morning, ladies. Can I start you off with something to drink?" she asked politely, keeping her voice even. The blonde woman smirked. "Oh, it's you. The waitress from last night. We were just talking about you." She leaned over to the others as if Kendra couldn't hear. "You wouldn't believe how she messed up our order. Guess some people just aren't cut out for customer service." The other 2 chuckled, and one of them added, "Maybe she should stick to jobs she's better suited for." There was a pause before she added in a lower voice, "If you know what I mean." Kendra felt the sting of their words, but she refused to flinch. "All right, I'll give you a moment to decide on drinks, she said calmly, and walked away to the counter. Inside, though, her thoughts were swirling. It wasn't just the rudeness. It was the condescension, the subtle digs that felt far too pointed to be innocent. From the counter, her co-worker and friend Mariah had been watching. "Girl, you want me to take that table?" she asked quietly. "Because I will. I don't mind shutting them down." Kendra shook her head. "No, I've got it. They want to push my buttons, and I'm not giving them the satisfaction." Over the next half hour, Kendra served them flawlessly. She made sure their coffee was hot, their food was fresh, and their table stayed spotless. But instead of appreciating her professionalism, the women seemed determined to find fault with everything. "This toast is too brown," one complained. "This coffee tastes burnt," another said. And then the blonde asked with fake sweetness, "Could you smile more? You look so serious. It's not very welcoming." Kendra bit her tongue. She wanted to point out that she had been smiling all morning, just not at their insults. Instead, she simply nodded and fixed their complaints without fuss. But something in her began to shift. If they thought they could break her, they were mistaken. When she returned with their bill, the blonde leaned back in her seat and said, I don't think you'll last long in this job. It takes a certain kind of polish. And, well, maybe that's not really your background." Kendra met her gaze, steady and unshaken. "You're probably right," she said. "I'm not going to be a waitress forever. I have other plans." She didn't elaborate, but the confidence in her tone caught the blonde off guard. For the first time, she didn't have a comeback. The women paid and left without a tip, but Kendra didn't let it ruin her mood. Instead, she cleaned the table, humming softly to herself. Mariah came over, shaking her head. "I swear, some people think they own the world." "Let them," Kendra replied. "I know who I am, and they can't take that away." Later that afternoon, as she was wiping down the counter, a well-dressed man walked into the diner. He wore a tailored suit and carried a leather briefcase. He greeted her warmly and took a seat near the window. Kendra recognized him. He was a lawyer who often came in for lunch. She had served him before, and he always left a generous tip. "Kendra, right?" he asked with a smile. "Yes, sir," she said, surprised he remembered her name. "I just wanted to say," he continued, "you're one of the most professional and kind servers I've ever met. I come here because of the way you treat people." Her heart swelled at his words. After the morning she had endured, it felt like the universe was reminding her that not everyone saw her through the lens of prejudice. Some saw her for her skill, her grace, and her humanity. By the time her shift ended, Kendra had made up her mind. She wasn't just going to endure these women's cruelty. She was going to show them, in her own way, that she was more than they could ever imagine. Tomorrow, she decided she would be ready for them. That night, she pulled out her notebook at home. Between her shifts at the diner, she had been taking business classes online. She had a dream of opening her own cafe one day, a place where kindness was the only rule. She began jotting down ideas, menu concepts, decor styles, and even the kind of community events she'd host. As she wrote, she smiled to herself. If those women thought they could define her worth, they had no idea who they were dealing with. The rain had finally eased by the time the early evening rush began. Inside the warm, dimly lit atmosphere of the restaurant, Tasha wiped her hands on her apron and straightened her posture. She was determined not to let the earlier encounter with those three women destroy her entire shift, but their sneering faces and mocking words still clung to her thoughts like wet clothes. It was one thing to face rude customers. Every server knew that was part of the job, but the venom in their voices, the way they laughed at her hair and twisted her skin tone into an insult, was something else entirely. Still, Tasha reminded herself that giving them more of her mental space would be letting them win, and she wasn't about to let that happen. The restaurant was busy now, filled with the buzz of conversation, clinking glasses, and the occasional bursts of laughter from diners enjoying their meals. Tasha found some comfort in the rhythm of her work. Table 8 needed more water, Table 4's steaks were almost ready, and the large party in the back room wanted extra bread baskets. She moved quickly between tables, her friendly smile in place, checking in on her regulars and doing her best to keep the atmosphere light. Just as she was about to pick up an order from the kitchen, she noticed movement at the front entrance. The 3 women had returned. Tasha froze for a second, her breath catching in her chest. They walked in together, each one with the same smug, confident stride. She remembered. The blonde one, whom Tasha now recognized as the leader, was holding her phone out, apparently recording as they entered. Her stomach dropped. She had a sinking feeling they weren't here for dinner. They were here for her. "Ladies," said Greg, the host, stepping forward with his usual professional smile. "Do you have a reservation?" The leader gave him a once-over before smirking. "No, we're just here to enjoy ourselves. It's a public place, isn't it?" She then glanced directly toward Tasha, and the camera followed. Tasha turned away and walked to the kitchen, trying to keep her breathing steady. Inside, she leaned against the counter for a moment, her co-workers looking at her in confusion. "They're back," she whispered to Miguel, one of the line cooks who'd been working there for years. "The ones from earlier?" he asked, frowning. "Yeah, and they've got their phone out." Miguel shook his head in disbelief. "Some people, do you want me to get the manager?" Before Tasha could answer, she heard the sound of raised voices from the dining area. She stepped back out and saw the women standing by the bar, filming themselves while making exaggerated comments about the service. "Honestly, I can't believe they still employ her," the blonde woman said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "I mean, you'd think they'd want someone a little more presentable serving their customers." Her friends laughed in agreement, the sound sharp and cruel. Greg approached them again, keeping his voice calm but firm. "Ladies, you're disturbing our guests. If you're not here to dine, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "Oh, we're here to dine," the blonde replied, smiling like she just won a game. "And we'd like her to be our waitress." She pointed straight at Tasha. The room seemed to hold its breath. Tasha's cheeks burned, but she took a deep breath and forced herself forward. "I'll take their table," she said quietly to Greg, who looked at her with concern. She approached the women with her order pad ready, her voice steady despite the tension twisting inside her. "Welcome back. What can I get for you?" They gave her their orders, but each request was laced with little digs. "Make sure the steak is actually cooked this time," one of them said, smirking. "And don't take forever. We know how busy you must be." They snickered like school bullies who thought they were clever. Tasha nodded and left without responding, her hands tight around the order pad. She delivered their requests to the kitchen and then busied herself with other tables, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. But their taunting continued. Every time she passed their table, they made little comments under their breath, just loud enough for her to hear. They criticized her hair again, mocked the way she pronounced salmon, and once even pretended to complain about a water spot on a glass, just to see if they could get her to stumble. It was the longest 45 minutes of her shift. Finally, their meals were ready, and Tasha served each plate with professional care. She was determined to keep her dignity intact. As she set the last dish down, the blonde woman pulled out her phone again and started recording. "Everyone," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "this is the kind of service you get here. Smile for the camera, sweetheart." Tasha paused, looking at the phone, then at the 3 women who were grinning like they'd cornered her. And that's when something in her shifted. She realized she had a choice. She could either let them humiliate her, or she could take control of the moment. With calm precision, she placed her tray under her arm and leaned forward slightly. "You know," she began, her tone friendly yet cutting in a way that made the nearby tables turn to listen, "I've been in this job for years. I've served people from all walks of life, families, celebrities, politicians, you name it. And in that time, I've learned something important. The way you treat the staff says a lot more about you than it does about the service you receive." The women's smiles faltered. Tasha continued, keeping her voice even and her words clear. "If your goal is to record a video that makes me look bad, I'm afraid you're wasting your time. All this will show is that 3 grown women came into a restaurant not to enjoy a meal, but to bully someone who's just doing her job." There was a ripple of murmurs from the surrounding tables. Some people even clapped quietly. The blonde's phone wavered in her hand, and her friends shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Tasha stepped back and smiled politely. "Enjoy your dinner," she said, before walking away with her head high. From that point on, the women were noticeably quieter. They still exchanged glances and whispered to each other, but the smug confidence they'd worn earlier had cracked. Other customers gave Tasha encouraging nods as she passed, and one older couple even stopped her to say, "Good for you." By the time the women finished their meals, they no longer looked like they were enjoying themselves. The blonde tossed her card onto the table without making eye contact, and Tasha processed the payment quickly. When she returned with the receipt, she simply said, "Have a good evening," and moved on. As they left, she caught sight of the phone still in the blonde's hand. Whatever video they had been trying to make, Tasha had a feeling it wouldn't have the effect they intended. What she didn't know yet was that this encounter wasn't over, and the next time they crossed paths, the tables would turn in a way none of them could have predicted. The sun had started its slow descent, sending warm orange rays through the large windows of the Blue Heron as the dinner rush prepared to explode. Customers were trickling in, their chatter filling the air. Amid the ambient clinking of glasses and the scent of roasted garlic drifting from the kitchen, Tanya moved with her usual graceful efficiency. Her body was tired. Lunch had been a whirlwind thanks to those 3 rude women earlier, but her spirit was steady. She had decided they would not get the best of her. Unfortunately, as the evening crowd swelled, she spotted them again. The 3 women from lunch, sitting at a table near the center of the dining room. Their loud laughter rose above the hum of the other diners, and Tanya noticed the staff exchanging uneasy glances. It wasn't unusual for regulars to return for dinner, but for them to come back after their lunchtime display, that was something else entirely. Tanya didn't let her smile falter when she approached them. "Good evening. Back again so soon?" she asked in a pleasant tone, though her stomach tightened. The ringleader, a woman named Janice, smirked like she was enjoying some private joke. "Yeah, we thought we'd give this place another try. Maybe tonight the service will be, what's the word? Acceptable." Her friends giggled, and Tanya felt the weight of several eyes on them. Other customers and a couple of coworkers who had overheard. She chose not to rise to the bait. "Well, I'll do my best to make sure you have a pleasant evening. Can I start you off with some drinks?" They ordered 3 glasses of wine, all while making exaggerated remarks about making sure it was the good kind this time. Tanya kept her voice even and professional, but her mind was spinning. She had a feeling they were back not for the food, but for some twisted form of entertainment, trying to provoke her into reacting. As she brought their drinks and took their dinner orders, their comments continued. "Isn't it funny," Janice said loudly, "how some people just aren't cut out for certain jobs? I mean, you can be nice, but there's more to good service than trying." Her friend, a woman with short blonde hair, added, "Yeah, but I guess when you can't find a better job, you make do with what you have." The words stung, but Tanya reminded herself that she was more than her job. She had dreams, goals, and self-worth that weren't defined by their ignorance. When she walked away from their table, she caught the eye of her manager, Rachel, who looked concerned. "You okay?" Rachel asked quietly. Tanya gave a small nod. "I'm fine. I can handle it." Rachel frowned. "Let me know if you want me to step in." But Tanya wasn't ready for that, at least not yet. She wanted to prove, to herself most of all, that she could rise above it. The dinner rush hit full force, and Tanya's other tables kept her busy. But the three women made sure she couldn't forget about them. They sent back a perfectly fine appetizer, claiming it was too cold, even though it had come straight from the kitchen. They asked for their drinks to be topped off constantly, then complained when Tanya wasn't instantly there with the wine bottle. By the time the entrees arrived, Tanya was balancing a mixture of frustration and calm, determined to make it through. But that's when Janice decided to push things further. "So, Tanya," Janice began, drawing out her name like it was a punchline. "Where are you from? And I don't mean this town." Tanya's voice stayed even. "I grew up just a few miles from here." "Really?" Janice feigned surprise. "You don't, I don't know, seem like you're from here." The implication was clear, and Tanya felt a flicker of heat in her chest. Other customers were definitely picking up on the tension now, and the room seemed to get quieter for a moment. Rachel had been hovering nearby, clearly ready to step in, but Tanya raised a hand subtly to let her know she had it under control. She placed the last plate on their table and leaned forward slightly, her voice soft but steady. "You know, Janice, you've been making little comments like that all day," Tanya said. "And while I'm here to make sure you enjoy your meal, I'd appreciate it if we could keep this about the food and service, not personal assumptions about me." Janice blinked, clearly not expecting Tanya to address her directly. Her friends exchanged glances, their smirks faltering. "We were just making conversation," Janice muttered. Tanya straightened, her tone still polite. "Conversation is welcome. Disrespect isn't. Now, if you need anything else, I'll be nearby." She turned and walked away, feeling her heart pound, but also a surge of relief. She hadn't lost her temper, but she also hadn't let them walk all over her. From that moment, the mood at their table shifted. They ate in relative silence, and while their expressions were still tight with annoyance, the mockery had stopped. But Tanya's quiet victory wasn't hers alone for long. A man sitting at a nearby table, who had been dining with his wife and 2 kids, caught Tanya as she passed by. "Miss," he said in a low voice, "I just wanted to say, I saw how you handled that. You were professional and respectful. That was impressive." His wife nodded in agreement, and Tanya smiled, feeling a warm wave of gratitude. That one small acknowledgement was enough to remind her that kindness and dignity could still win, even in the face of ignorance. When Janice and her friends finally asked for the check, they left without a tip, but Tanya didn't care. She wasn't working for their approval. She'd kept her self-respect intact, and that meant more than anything they could have written on a receipt. What Tanya didn't know yet was that this wasn't the end of the story. The women's behavior hadn't gone unnoticed, and other customers were about to make sure their cruelty didn't stay hidden. The air in the restaurant felt electric that evening. Word about the incident between Vanessa and the 3 women had spread far beyond the small town, thanks to the viral video that Alex had posted. People from nearby cities were coming in just to meet the waitress who stood her ground, and the restaurant's phone kept ringing with interview requests from local news stations. Vanessa had tried to remain humble, brushing it off with a shy smile whenever someone recognized her. But deep down, she couldn't help feeling a flicker of pride. For years, she'd endured quiet, unspoken slights and open hostility from certain customers, always swallowing her responses because she needed the job. But now it was different. She wasn't just defending herself. She was standing up for something much bigger. The 3 women, however, were not as quiet as Vanessa would have liked. They had returned to the restaurant a few days later, attempting to cause more trouble. This time, Vanessa was prepared. She didn't confront them with anger. She confronted them with composure. They strutted in, wearing smug expressions, trying to pretend they were there for a normal meal. The entire staff noticed the tension the moment they walked through the door. Alex gave Vanessa a concerned glance, silently offering to serve them himself, but she shook her head. "I've got this," she whispered. When Vanessa approached their table, the women started with their usual passive-aggressive comments. "Oh, it's you again," one of them said, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "We were wondering if the service had improved here, but I guess not." Another woman added, "Let's hope the food comes faster this time. Or we might just have to make another public complaint." Vanessa took a deep breath and kept her voice steady. "Ladies," she began, "you're more than welcome to be here, just like anyone else. But I'm not going to allow anyone to disrespect me or the staff. We treat everyone with the same level of service and respect, and I expect the same in return." Her words were calm, but there was a quiet authority in her tone that made the women pause. They weren't used to being called out so directly. One of them tried to laugh it off. "Oh, come on, don't be so sensitive. We were just joking last time." Vanessa's eyes didn't waver. "You might think it's a joke," she replied, "but what you said last time wasn't funny, it was hurtful. And the way you treated me, it wasn't about the service, and we both know that." The women exchanged uncomfortable glances. Around them, other diners had started to pay attention. No one was yelling, but the tension was thick. Vanessa could tell that the women were torn between doubling down and walking away quietly. The thing was, they weren't in control anymore. She was. Instead of continuing the argument, Vanessa pulled out a small notepad and said, "So, what can I get you tonight?" It was a subtle but powerful move. She refused to let them dictate the situation. They could either order respectfully or leave. The women hesitated for a few moments before finally ordering their meals, keeping their comments to themselves. It wasn't an apology, but it was a start. Later that night, after the women had left without incident, a man from one of the nearby tables approached Vanessa. "I just wanted to say," he told her, "what you did tonight, that was real strength. You didn't stoop to their level. You showed everyone here how to stand up for yourself without losing your dignity." Vanessa smiled, her eyes softening. "Thank you," she said quietly. When she got home that night, she checked her phone to see dozens of new messages and comments online. The video of the confrontation from the week before had been picked up by multiple social media accounts with huge followings. People were praising her for handling the situation with grace and courage, and some were even sharing their own stories of being treated unfairly because of their race. She realized this wasn't just about her. It was about giving a voice to people who felt silenced for too long. The next day, the restaurant owner, Mr. Harris, called her into his office. "Vanessa," he began, "I've been in this business a long time, and I've seen plenty of situations like this, but I've never seen someone handle it the way you did. I'm proud of you, and I want you to know you're not just an employee here. You're part of the heart of this place." Vanessa felt a lump in her throat. For years, she'd been afraid that speaking up would cost her everything. Now, she saw that speaking up could actually open doors. Weeks later, the three women came back again. Only this time, they weren't there to cause trouble. They sat quietly at their table, placed their order without a single snide remark, and even left a generous tip. As Vanessa collected the bill, one of them met her eyes and said softly, "We were wrong." It wasn't a grand public apology, but it was enough. In the end, Vanessa's story became more than just a moment of defiance in a restaurant. It became a reminder that you don't have to match hate with hate. You can meet it with courage, truth, and respect for yourself. And sometimes that's what truly leaves people speechless.